Hello, everyone. This is the August 2nd, 2021 edition of the Kubernetes Steering Committee meeting. This is our public meeting. We have a number of topics to get through, so let's kick it off. First up on the agenda is the working group naming dissolution request. Who added that to the agenda? Do you want to briefly speak on it?
I added it. The thread was dangling and no one had replied, and I wanted to make sure we wrapped that up and got an answer for them. So I don't have any more context than the thread that I linked. Bob, it sounded like you had some updates there.
I had spoken to Celeste and Stephen just regarding like next steps. Their outstanding question on it was who should officially own the process for, determining if something should be like the language evaluation framework and potentially organizing how those things get removed. I think that's the dangling artifact / process.
Okay, are there specific artifacts they don't know where they're going to go?
I think it was like originally it was, I believe, going to go to SIG-Arch. Is that something, so I guess the question is that something SIG-Arch still wants to own?
Yeah, what I was saying there probably was anything that doesn't have an owner, SIG-Arch owns, right? So if there is another owner, please let's make sure we have it.
It seemed like there were three kind of pieces there. One was the evaluation framework, which the working group actually did put together. So I think that would probably make sense to at least link to from like the API review conventions and things, like when you're picking names for fields and flags and types and arguments and whatever, like consider this, make that part of what we consider. Mm-hmm. The second piece was like who drives evolution of that decision framework, and maybe we don't really anticipate that evolving much. It's kind of a like look for common uses and look for state of the art and look, maybe we don't imagine that evolving much. So maybe that doesn't need a particular owner. And then the third was the areas that were already identified, like who owns the work. And I think that was largely distributed to the owners of those components. So the SIGs that own those components to prioritize, and like for the branch, SIG release, contribx, test infra, kind of that combination. So I think as long as it's clear, like we identified these things and here are the issues tracking them and they're owned by the relevant SIGs to prioritize and plan, and that makes sense to me.
Okay.
I can take the AI to link to the evaluation framework docs from the API review conventions and process.
Is the current evaluation docs in the working group directory?
Probably. I will find that out. If that's a good question. If the working group is dissolving, should those be rehomed to like the folder that has the API conventions? Maybe. I mean, it's not just API, right? It's also docs and other things as well. So if this is getting reparented to SIG-Arch, maybe it could go to the SIG-Arch folder and we can link to it there from various places. I think it's weird to have a dangling artifacts directory by a working group that isn't meeting anymore or have a clear point of contact.
Completely agree there.
Okay, so I see one action item for Jordan. Bob, can you, well, I think you're listed as the liaison for the working group. Are you able to work with them to just make sure they understand what the action items are for the working group chairs of like, okay, here's these and any other action items, just make sure you go and connect with SIG-Arch or whatever other group will be owning them, so that we know where the artifacts are going. Because I think that's the last question there before we can just shutter them.
That I can do.
Great. Are there any other comments as far as working group naming? Okay. Thank you, Dims and Jordan, for taking notes on that. The next one here is Kubernetes and Kubernetes SIGs org membership should be equivalent.
Yep. So this is an older issue that we revisited a couple times, but the way like our org structure currently works is if you join the Kubernetes org, you are then allowed to join any other Kubernetes org. But if like you are ed like Kubernetes SIGs, but not Kubernetes, that relationship does not work the opposite way. And originally there were concerns around like the collection of people that were added to like Incubator. I think that like predates that issue by a fair amount, but now that Incubator has been retired and there's not a large diff between like members that are in Kubernetes SIGs, but not in Kubernetes, it kind of seems like it should really just be join Kubernetes, not join this specific GitHub org.
Yeah. At
Yeah.
this
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna comment that like at this point, I know some of our, like the original thoughts and objections were around like how many stale folks we had in the Kubernetes org and the Kubernetes SIGs org, and we didn't have inactivity pruning, which is something that we do have now. So I don't know that I have any objections to this.
Yeah, I'm in favor of this. I think it's confusing for people to have different membership lists or different requirements. Or I think join the Kubernetes project is a good like unifying metric. I linked to the comment where I think Bob had looked at stats of like who was in Kubernetes SIGs but not Kubernetes, and ideally we could look at that list of folks and like I would guess pretty much all of them would qualify for Kubernetes membership without any issues at all. But if there happen to not to be some that don't, we could encourage them to apply for that. I'm +1 on unifying those two orgs.
Okay. I would suggest, if there's no objections, that we just punt this over to GitHub management and let them work out if there's any like
we can update the policy
issues or anything else.
Do we take a formal vote?
I think that's probably good.
Do we need a formal vote on this, considering this is something that is chartered over to GitHub management?
Membership requirements for Kubernetes, like the mechanics of it are chartered over there, but like the membership requirements for Kubernetes probably is like governance-ish. If we all agree, that's helpful to get on the record.
Yeah, right. If 5 of us are here, we have quorum.
Yeah. I would suggest all in favor of making the requirements for Kubernetes SIGs and Kubernetes membership combined. Say aye. I'm +1. All right. And anyone opposed or concerned? It didn't sound like it. Great.
Okay, great. Any last comments on Kubernetes and Kubernetes SIG org membership should be equivalent? Moving on. There's a generic item here with 3 kind of like sub items of like things that look like they need somebody to help move them forward. Did anybody, I'm not sure who added this. Does anybody have any comments on this?
I think Paris had added these. She had done a good job of like opening tracking issues for these, but I think they kind of all got assigned to her when she opened them, and she's looking to sort of fan out that work. So
That makes sense.
I can do that. So for the tech leads be mandatory, one approach I was thinking of was just ping the existing chairs and ask which of the chairs would be like, would they like to be added as tech lead, or if they identify somebody else, right? So was that what we had ended up with last time?
I think we had talked about.
There must be one. It could be the existing chair.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry.
We had talked about explicitly calling out who was fulfilling the tech lead role, and to start to backfill at the very least, the people who are chair in a SIG that only has chairs are implicitly filling the tech lead role. And so I think there is value in recognizing those are two distinct sets of responsibilities and documenting, like, who do you talk to for chair stuff? Who do you talk to for tech lead stuff? Even if it happens to be the same person. And that makes it clear that there are two sets of responsibilities and they can hand off one or both. So I think the first step would probably be to describe what we would suggest in terms of like what the delta is, which is just document who the tech leads are. And it's okay for it to be the same person, just to clarify that it's two sets of responsibilities, and then take that to the chairs and tech leads meetings or list or Slack and get feedback on that suggestion.
So should we file a PR with the names of the tech leads and then ask all the chairs to sign off? I'm trying to make it easy and not drag it out.
I think the first step is to change the governance doc to switch tech leads from being an optional thing to being you need a tech lead role. It can be the same person.
So I'm going to step in for a second. I don't think that's where we got to the last time we talked about this. The last time we talked about this, I believe where we got to was there was a whole bunch of feedback on a number of different things. Paris was going to split them out into issues, and then we were going to seek feedback from the chairs and tech leads about whether this is a valuable decision so that we as steering are not making that in a bubble.
Right. Sorry, to clarify, like the order of operations is get feedback on changing the governance doc. Then if there's agreement that this is a useful thing to do and doesn't increase busy work and overhead and provides value to the community because it clarifies these two distinct roles, then go through the mechanics of sort of backfilling the SIGs that haven't identified a tech lead. So yes, +1 to Christoph's comment about getting feedback from the SIG and working group leadership on this proposed change to the governance doc. So it would help if we could describe to them like what the net change would be for SIGs that don't already use this role.
Okay, so we need to assign an action item. So anybody wants to take this?
I'll take it. We can talk about the next week's chair and TL meeting.
Yeah.
Great. So on a similar note, the next one is, I think we basically reached this one with the terms and term limits for chairs as well as like a separate discrete discussion.
Yeah.
Where we were going to, again, split it out and seek specific feedback on what is a term, how long a term should be, and then are there such things as term limits? Like, can, can a SIG decide, like, on a recurring basis, okay, we're reviewing our leadership for this term and we want to keep the same leadership or we want to change leadership. It looks like that one is assigned to Paris, whereas the other ones aren't. So I'm not sure if she wants to drive that forward or if she's looking for assistance for somebody else to kind of take and drive forward that feedback. Because again, I believe that's where we arrived to last session, was specifically drive a feedback and a discussion around that.
I'm happy to help drive this. You can double assign me and keep Paris assigned. I'm not sure if she was actively working on it or not. So Bob, maybe you and I can coordinate. These two things seem like they would be good to sort of bring together to the leads meeting. Like, here are a couple changes we're considering and would like feedback on. So we can get together and
yeah,
work on that.
Okay.
It looked like Elena had made a comment on the term and term limits, asking if the idea of terms and the idea of term limits could be addressed separately. And I think that's valuable. Like, there is a term that individuals can reconsider their involvement to or commit to leading for a season. Like, I think the idea of terms is valuable, even if there's not a term limit idea.
It gives people a bound on a length of work.
Right. Would you lead in this area until you collapse from exhaustion or die? It's like, maybe. So yeah, I'm +1 on that, but we can talk about that in the issue.
Great. And then the third one is the annual reports, actions, and write-up.
I think those are a bunch of individual tasks that need help driving them.
Actually, just on the prior one, we don't have any explicit text that mandates the number of TLs or chairs in a SIG. I think we have loose guidance. Like,
we have minimums, I believe.
There's a minimum of 1 chair. That's it.
yeah.
We found that 0 chairs doesn't work very well. So
I guess what I was wondering is if terms and term limits only make sense if you have a better minimum. And then relating to terms, like having a size of 1 doesn't necessarily work well, because you want to have some overlapping period where you can take established people to mentor new people in that term and that type of thing. Is there do you want a separate issue for like minimum role participant list, or do we see a conflict maybe coming out of this if we don't do that?
I would suggest dropping those comments on the existing issue and the existing discussion. Because, like, yeah, we can separate a bunch of these things out, but I think separating them out too much fragments the discussion when a lot of these are related. That's why, like, my personal opinion is I like that terms and term limits are together for purposes of discussion, because again, they can relate each other. You can't have term limits without terms, and based on the length of the term, that can determine for people, it is a term limit required or a good idea here, or what that term limit looks like, based on the length of the term and how often you're reviewing that. But yeah, I think those are fair comments, Derek. But my suggestion would be, like, let's coalesce those comments into that issue so that we can, as we're discussing them, we can consider those items together. Okay. For the annual report, actions, and write-up, unless anybody has any objections, I can take that one on and try and drive some of those individual items forward.
Actually, sort of tangentially, I think you still have an outstanding PR updating the generator for some of the previous stuff.
Yeah, that's what keyed off. Like, okay, I'll take this one because I did create the initial generator, but yeah, there's some feedback that I need to review and address. Okay. Last call for comments on any of those 3 items. Annual report, actions and wrap up, tech leads being mandatory, terms and term limits for chairs.
On the terms and terms limit for chairs, I know the OpenStack community leadership want to reach out again. Did they do terms and term limits for chairs? And is that like an item we want to go and solicit feedback on and asking if it's continuing to work at their phase of community maturation? Is my memory wrong on that? I thought that they did have some voting process.
They do vote on a specific frequency. I don't know if they have specific term limits on number of terms each person can stand for, but they mandate voting every 6 months, every year, something like that at some point.
Okay, maybe it's worth when we do meet with them again to ask, like, are they happy with this before we, maybe emulate it, and maybe they're making changes.
And there's a couple other groups at the projects in the CNCF that do something similar, and the CNCF also has like term limits for the chairs and TLs for all their individual tags.
One thing I'm pretty sure everyone else is aware of this as well. Just the overhead of running like formal elections. We have a lot of SIGs, and just knowing how much effort it takes for the steering elections, and like we have a small number of elections we run now, and it actually takes a lot of effort. We just need to be aware of like what we're asking folks to take on and who would actually drive this. And like you could easily imagine sort of DOSing the capacity of the SIGs with like, you need to run an election every year to reevaluate all your leadership. And if that takes like a month or 2 months end to end, it's like a significant amount of the project's energy. So
Okay, last call for comments. Okay, moving on. An FYI that a funding request is likely coming through. Looks like this is for leadership training topics. That looks like a lot of folks are interested in that. Okay. Doesn't look like there's an action item yet, but we can review the funding request when it comes in. Next one is on the GB meeting end result. Unfortunately, Paris isn't here. Dims, can you speak to this one very briefly?
Yes, we had almost 5 to 10 minutes on the GB TOC joint meeting, the last 5 minutes. So Parish had to rush through a little bit, but we got the word out. Well, not we, Paris. Paris presented, 4 or 5 slides and summarizing the stuff that we have in our report. And essentially, she told everyone to pass the link to the report to their respective orgs, highlighting the specific section about help wanted in various SIGs. And we are hoping to get some feedback at some point, but we ran out of time. We were trying to point out the obvious things, tragedy of the commons and where exactly we need help, and SIG testing and case working group infra and things like that. So we didn't, the meeting kind of like disbanded at the end, so we didn't get any specific thing from anyone saying that they're going to get back to us, but hoping we will. There is a LF meeting in Napa Valley around the same time as KubeCon, probably 2 weeks after or 2 weeks before or something like that. So there is going to be another GB TOC meeting in that forum or in KubeCon at some point. I don't know, I forget which one. So I think we will send out a reminder once again before that meeting.
Okay. Thanks, Dims. Any other comments before we move on?
Since we are talking about the GB meeting, there was quite a bit of time spent in the GB meeting around KubeCon and the safety at KubeCon and things like that. So there is public announcements that have already gone out. So there was nothing specific new that they were talking about there, but the general concern around safety and what will we do, and especially people who are setting things up there and people who are going to be there before the KubeCon, and things like how are we going to handle PR fallouts, those kinds of things were talked about. And it feels like they have a plan, whether we like it or not, they have a plan. And it's going to happen. There is no, one thing for sure is it's going to go on, and there is no turning back now. We are past the time when they would have shut it down, and they said, it's all good right now, unless the state government or the federal government has a mandatory or the CDC comes up with specific things to shut it down. It's going to go on.
Just curious, is KubeCon the first conference put on by Linux Foundation since COVID, or will there be other conferences that have occurred before that?
That have happened. There are several that are happening before. One of them they pointed out was in UK or Ireland. They had a OSPOCon or something like that. So that was one. And Bob, you were nodding.
Yeah, the OSPOCon is really the dry run for KubeCon. That's the one at the, I think, end of September, or it might be. I know it's in September. I think later September. But the entire process, the entire team for validating all the vaccination requirements, all that is like the process is intended to be the same.
Right. And Ihor mentioned open source summit.
Yeah, it's actually the OSPOCon that Bob has mentioned. So we plan to run it in like the last week of September. It will be held in Seattle. So the original plan was to run it in Dublin, but earlier this year we moved it. We've decided to move it to the United States, and we plan to run it in Seattle. But yes, as Bob mentioned, we basically planned this event also, like considering this event as a dry run before KubeCon in a few weeks in LA.
Yeah, and the other thing was in the LA at the venue, they're going to have at least 2 or more large conferences before us. So we are not going to be the first one, to have this size of number of people there.
Yeah.
Any last comments on that one?
As one sort of indirect one is that we are also factoring all this stuff into the contributor summit and the planning of that, along with, the venue selection and all that other fun stuff.
Okay, so the Linux Foundation Member Summit, which was previously called Open Source Leadership Summit, is in November 2 to 4 in Napa Valley. That was the one that I was blanking out. They were talking about people who want to miss KubeCon but want to go to a smaller event. This is an event that we could go to. CFPs are open, and if we need to, and they are sending out passes to each org member. And if you run out of passes, then we ping CNCF staff and request. Added the link in the chat.
Okay. If there's nothing else on that one, we can move on. Working group Kubernetes Infra. They have put in a proposal to move to a SIG.
So there is one feedback on this one, which is the chairs of the working group put together. Well, Aaron put together the document, and we the other chairs, kind of like said okay. So Aaron forwarded an email to steering, but I'm guessing that we should make sure that all the SIGs involved take a look at this as well before we file a PR or whatever to make it official. Before steering gets a vote, I guess.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yep.
Looks like Nikita's the liaison for the working group. And stakeholders are architecture, contribx, release, and testing.
With progress. So I assigned it to Nikita.
Yeah. I'll make sure to touch base with Nikita just to make sure that she understands either that ask if she can take that on or if she needs some help with it if she's out of office or busy with some other stuff.
I think she's out this week too.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just leave a comment about getting the stakeholder SIGs to weigh in, we can sort of unblock and defer to them and get that going in this week. Hopefully that can wrap up in the next few days or week or whatever, and don't have to wait for Nikita to get back. I can add that comment to the issue if, yeah, just to get that going.
Any other comments on that one? Okay. I added this next one just to basically ask Bob. Is there any update on the next steps for steering committee election?
I was actually talking with Josh about that a little bit before this meeting. He has not found, he was taking the AI to try and find more sponsors, or not more sponsors, more committee members, and that fell through the cracks. And honestly, it fell through. Like, I was going to talk to him last week about it too, and it completely left my mind. But we've synced on it and should have an update probably later this week.
Cool. Okay, if there's no other comments on the upcoming steering committee elections, then that brings us to the end of our stated agenda. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up, either from steering committee members or from community members at large? Going once. Going twice. Okay. If there's nothing else, then we can end early today.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers, everyone. Happy Monday.